The biting wind whispered through the forest trees as Sarah pedaled her mountain bike along the desolate trail. She had always loved the feeling of freedom that cycling gave her, and this remote trail was the perfect place to escape the stresses of everyday life. The Serenity Trail, as it was known among locals, was a place where Sarah felt at peace. Tall trees created a green canopy above her, filtering the sunlight and casting undulating shadows on the ground. The fresh scent of leaves and the melody of birds filled the air, making her feel at one with nature. However, that afternoon, something felt different. The silence that was normally broken only by the sounds of the forest was filled with an eerie feeling, as if something was waiting in the shadows. Sarah tried to ignore this feeling and continued pedaling. As she made her way down the winding trail, she noticed movement in the trees to her right. They were just fleeting shadows, but they seemed to move deliberately. Sarah stopped her bike and watched warily, her heart racing. The shadows continued to move, taking on a more defined shape. Human figures seemed to rise from the trees, their outlines dark and blurred. Sarah blinked, thinking that her vision was deceiving her. But the figures remained there, staring at her. The wind whispered through the leaves and brought with it an almost inaudible murmur. It sounded like a distant whisper, a soft conversation she couldn't understand. Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine, and the feeling of being watched intensified. Deciding what her imagination was playing with her, Sarah continued to pedal down the trail. However, the shadowy figures continued to follow her, remaining in the shadows of the trees. His eyes, invisible in the darkness, glowed with a pale, disturbing light. The sun began to set, and the trail fell into gradual darkness. Her bicycle headlight only illuminated a small part of the path in front of her. The murmur of the shadowy figures seemed louder, and the unintelligible whisper echoed in her ears. Sarah picked up the pace, feeling uncomfortable and anxious. The air was getting colder, and the feeling that something was wrong haunted her. It was then that, in front of her, a tall, shadowy figure stood in the middle of the path. It was a man dressed in old, tattered clothes, his face partially hidden by shadows. His eyes, however, glowed with a reddish hue, like two burning embers in the darkness. Sarah stopped the bike abruptly, her heart racing with fear and surprise. The shadowy figure blocked the path, emanating an aura of palpable menace. She tried to call for help, but her voice seemed to catch in her throat. The shadowy figure extended a thin arm towards him, the fingers slender and cold as ice. Sarah felt an overwhelming panic wash over her as the figure slowly approached. The darkness seemed to close in around her, as if the forest were alive and conspiring against her. What was this shadowy figure? Why had he followed her there? Sarah was about to discover that the Serenity Trail was about to turn into an unimaginable nightmare as she delved deeper into the darkness that enveloped her. Sarah was paralyzed by fear. The shadowy figure in front of her continued to slowly approach, its red eyes glowing ominously. She could feel an intense sense of malevolence emanating from him. "Who are you?" Sarah whispered, her voice shaky and weak. The shadowy figure didn't respond with words, just continued to advance towards her. Her steps were slow and deliberate, as if she was savoring the fear she caused. Sarah, finally regaining control of her senses, tried to retreat and escape the trail. But, to her surprise and horror, her bike was unresponsive. The wheels seemed glued to the ground, as if something invisible was holding it there. Panic gripped her as the shadowy figure reached a thin arm towards her, grabbing her wrist. His fingers were cold as ice and squeezed with supernatural strength. Sarah tried to pull her wrist, but it was useless. She was trapped. The surrounding trees began to rustle more intensely, as if they were witnessing the terrible event unfolding before them. The wind seemed to speed up, howling ominously as leaves and branches rustled. The shadowy figure finally spoke, his voice a hoarse, dark whisper. "You shouldn't be here, Sarah." Sarah swallowed hard, her eyes fixed on the figure's glowing eyes. "What do you want?" The sinister smile on the figure's face widened, revealing ivory white teeth in contrast to the darkness that surrounded it. "I want what everyone wants, my dear. A chance." Before Sarah could respond, the shadowy figure began to move again, pulling her closer. She fought and resisted with all her might, but seemed powerless against the figure's supernatural strength. As she approached closer, Sarah saw something that made her freeze in terror. Other shadowy figures began to emerge from the shadows of the surrounding trees, all of them staring at her with hungry red eyes. "What are you?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. The shadowy figures didn't respond, just continued to approach, their hands reaching toward her. The darkness seemed to close in around Sarah, enveloping her like an icy cloak. It was then that she remembered an ancient amulet of protection her grandmother had given her when she was a child. She carried it with her as a souvenir, but had never believed in its effectiveness. Desperate, she clutched the amulet around her neck and whispered a prayer she barely remembered. A dim but comforting light emitted from the amulet, forming an invisible barrier around him. The shadowy figures stepped back, releasing her from their icy grip. Sarah took the chance and ran towards her bike. The bike was still stuck, but with a supreme effort, she managed to pull it off the ground and climb onto it. The bike's headlights shined brighter as she pedaled in the opposite direction, leaving behind the shadowy figures that now seemed enraged. The wind howled in her ears as Sarah sped down the dark, winding trail. The shadowy figures disappeared into the darkness, and the murmur of the trees gradually subsided. Finally, Sarah emerged from the trail and headed back to the main road, where the moonlight illuminated her path. She was terrified, but relieved to have escaped the nightmare in the forest. The frightening experience changed Sarah forever. She never ventured onto the Serenity Trail again and avoided any remote places at night. She knew there were dark, unknown things in the darkness, waiting to break free and draw her into their icy embrace. The Serenity Trail had become a terrifying reminder that, in the solitude of the night, the unknown lurks, ready to devour those who dare challenge it. After escaping the nightmare on the Serenity Trail, Sarah was determined to discover what or who the shadowy figures were that had stalked her that frightening night. She spent days searching through old books and talking to locals, hoping to find clues about what had happened. It was then that she heard about an ancient legend that had been passed down from generation to generation in the city. It was the legend of the Shadow Guardians, dark entities who were guardians of an ancient secret. According to legend, the Shadow Guardians were ancient protectors of a powerful and mysterious artifact that was buried in the forest near the Serenity Trail. This artifact was known as the Relic of Darkness and was said to contain powers beyond human understanding. Sarah decided to explore the forest in search of the Relic of Darkness, hoping that her discovery might explain the enigma of the shadowy figures. She invited her childhood friend, Alex, to join her on this risky quest, as she believed safety lay in unity. Together, they ventured into the dense forest toward the Serenity Trail. The atmosphere was different during the day, with sunlight filtering through the tree leaves, creating golden patterns on the ground. However, the feeling that they were being watched persisted. As they advanced, Sarah and Alex found strange markings on the trees, mysterious inscriptions that they didn't recognize. The inscriptions seemed to form a path, as if they were being guided by some unknown force. Finally, they arrived at a clearing in the forest where an ancient stone was positioned in the center. It was a large, dark stone with intricate carvings that resembled the inscriptions on the trees. Sarah believed that this stone could be linked to the Relic of Darkness. As they examined the stone, a soft whispering voice began to fill the air around them. It was as if the shadows of the forest were speaking, telling an ancient and dark story. The voice told of the Relic of Darkness and the Shadow Guardians that protected it. Suddenly, the stone began to glow with a dim light, revealing a hidden passage beneath it. Sarah and Alex exchanged glances, feeling irresistibly drawn towards the underground opening. They descended through the narrow passage, entering a mysterious underground world. There, they discovered an ancient shrine, adorned with strange symbols and unlit candles. In the center of the sanctuary rested the Relic of Darkness, a black sphere that seemed to emanate a dark energy. As they watched the relic, Sarah and Alex felt a dark presence approaching. The shadowy figures in the trees, the Shadow Guardians, emerged from the shadows of the sanctuary. Its red eyes glowed brightly, but this time it didn't look hostile. The Shadow Guardians revealed the truth to Sarah and Alex. They had pursued Sarah on the trail because they believed she was destined to find the Relic of Darkness and unlock its secrets. The Guardians were the ancestral guardians of the relic, sworn to protect it at all costs. The Relic of Darkness contained incredible power, but its incorrect use could release an uncontrollable evil force. Sarah and Alex understood that their discovery was both a blessing and a curse. They agreed to leave the relic untouched and thanked the Shadow Guardians for revealing the truth. As they left the underground sanctuary and returned to the surface, the Shadow Guardians disappeared into the shadows of the forest, satisfied that they had accomplished their mission. Sarah and Alex returned to the city with a deep respect for the history and secrets the forest held. Never again would the Serenity Trail be just a place of peace for Sarah, but also a reminder that the world is full of dark mysteries, and that sometimes these secrets are best left dormant in the shadows. After the discovery in the forest and the encounter with the Shadow Guardians, Sarah and Alex's lives would never be the same. They kept their promise to leave the Relic of Darkness untouched, respecting the Guardians' warning and the importance of maintaining balance. Yet the secret of the relic weighed on them, a constant temptation that made them wonder what they might have discovered if they had used it. This curiosity began to eat away at his mind and undermine his relationship. Sarah wished to follow the Guardian's advice and leave the past behind, while Alex was determined to explore the relic's hidden secrets. Arguments between them became increasingly frequent and intense. Alex argued that the relic could be studied and used for the good of humanity, while Sarah feared the risks involved in messing with unknown forces. A year has passed since the discovery in the forest, and the tension between Sarah and Alex has reached its breaking point. On a stormy night, as torrential rain fell outside, the argument reached its breaking point. "I can't live like this anymore, Alex," said Sarah, with tears in her eyes. "This obsession with the relic is destroying us. I just want a normal life, away from all this darkness." Alex stubbornly retorted, "You don't understand, Sarah. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Imagine what we can achieve with this power." The argument intensified until Alex, blinded by his determination, decided to go to the forest and retrieve the Relic of Darkness. Ignoring Sarah's pleas to reconsider, he set out into the storm, determined to explore the dark secrets the relic hid. Hours later, when the rain stopped and morning arrived, Sarah realized what had happened. She ran into the forest, her heart tight with worry and fear. The trees were still damp from the night's rain, and the forest seemed calm, but there was an oppressive silence in the air. Sarah followed Alex's trail, remembering the paths they had traveled together a year ago. She finally arrived at the underground sanctuary where the Relic of Darkness was kept. The place was empty. The relic was gone. Desperation gripped Sarah as she realized Alex had gotten his hands on the relic and unleashed a force he couldn't control. The shadows of the forest began to stir, and the murmur of the trees turned into a menacing roar. She followed the destructive trails left by Alex, which seemed to lead to a dark place in the heart of the forest. When she finally found him, he was surrounded by terrible darkness, his eyes glowing a frightening red, just like the Shadow Guardians. "Alex, stop!" she shouted, trying to reach him. "You can't control this." But Alex was beyond the reach of reason, and darkness enveloped him more and more. The Relic of Darkness consumed him, transforming him into an unrecognizable and menacing creature. Sarah knew what needed to be done. She approached Alex, her protective amulet glowing dimly. With tears in her eyes, she whispered the same prayer she had used to protect herself deep in the forest a year ago. The light from the amulet enveloped Alex, pushing the darkness away from him. He trembled. For a moment, his eyes lost their red glow. It was enough time for Sarah to grab him and pull him out of the darkness. The Relic of Darkness remained behind, unable to escape the forest, and the darkness retreated, leaving Alex unharmed but deeply shaken. The incident served as a powerful lesson for both. They understood that the temptation to seek dark power was not worth the risk of losing themselves. They left the relic where it was, in its underground sanctuary, and walked away from the darkness they had encountered. Sarah and Alex returned to the city, wiser and more humble. They learned that sometimes the search for truth can take you to dark and dangerous places, and that true power lies in the wisdom of leaving hidden secrets where they belong, in the darkness of history.